Hello and welcome to CodeSlicing. In this episode, our sights are firmly set on the Disney Plus ad icon. The nice little animated icon that you add things to your list with and remove things from it. Now, you might think that it looks quite similar to the last icon that we did, which was the up arrow to tick icon, but there are two big differences. The first difference is that we aren't going to be animating any of the points in this shape. We are only going to be animating the layout guides that drive the position of those points. The second thing is that there is asymmetry in this design, in that when you add things to your list, it does a different animation from when you remove things from your list. So that adds another complication that we'll have to deal with. So with all that being said, I'm going to give myself 10 minutes to do this one. Now, given that we did the last one in 5 minutes, you'd think there's probably enough time, but that extra complexity could get in the way. So let's see how we get on and see if you can keep up. Let's do it. Right, we've got a bit of setup to do before we start this one, because I don't want to waste time while we're building the actual icon. So down here, I'm going to give this a frame. And then we're going to give that a greedy frame, so it takes up everything. And I put this background on it, which is going to be nearly black. And then I'm going to ignore all safe areas with a nice new modifier from Xcode 12. I am then going to show layout guides, because we're going to need them in a bit. And now we're ready to begin. So let's start the clock, please. First thing we need is a shape, add icon, and then we're going to replace this with a geometry reader, the contents of which are going to be our add icon. We're going to give it a stroke that is based on that size. Stroke size is equal to geo width scaled times 0.075. We can then say that the add icon has a stroke with a white color and a style with a line width of stroke size, a line cap of round, and we don't need the rest of them. Resume. And now we're going to come up with a very specific layout guide, which is going to be symmetrical, but not regular. So we're going to say that the tip ratio is equal to 0.365. And that's the tip of the cross that we're doing. We'll say that the steps is equal to 0, tip ratio 0.5, 1 minus tip ratio, comma 1. And then we define our layout guide config. Icon layout config is equal to layout guide config grid with the columns of steps and the rows of steps. We can then say on our icon, layout guide is equal to icon layout config. Resume. And there we are. That's what we're going to use. Now let's define our shape. We're going to define one layout guide for the horizontal and one layout guide for the vertical. Our GH is equal to icon layout config laid out in the rectangle. We'll add one line from GH 1,2 to GH 3,2. That should give us our line. We'll create one for the vertical line. We'll rename GH to GV. And we'll say that the line is actually from 2,1 to 2,3. There's our cross or add. Just going to move that down, give us some space, because now we want to think about how we want to animate this. And for the moment, I'm just going to comment out the vertical line, and I'm going to concentrate on animating that into its final position. So I'm going to give it an animatable data here, which is a double. I'm going to set it to 1 in its tick position. Then I'm going to start transforming this layout. So we need to scale it in the X direction by a factor of 0.6. We do that with layout guides like this. Scaled with a size with just a width of 0.6 and a factor of animatable data. Then I want to rotate it. Rotated minus 135 degrees with a factor, again, of animatable data. And we're going to offset it by a scaling of the rectangle size. So size scaled minus 0.11 in the X direction and 0.08 in the Y. And we're going to represent that as a CG point. Give this whole thing a factor of animatable data. And there it is in its final position. Now we're going to do the same thing for the vertical line. So here's our vertical line. We'll bring that one in. The first thing we're going to do is scale the height of this thing. So it's going to be scaled by a size with just a height of 1.3. So it gets a bit bigger with a factor of animatable data. Then we rotate it 218 degrees with a factor of animatable data. And then we offset the X by the width scaled of the rectangle of 0.06, also with a factor of animatable data. So now, as I change this, you can see, all right, it goes. It's working. So we'll move that up to satisfy the animatable protocol. We'll give it an initializer, the Boolean saying whether we're added or not. And we'll say the animatable data is equal to added, question mark, yes or no. I'm also going to store whether it's added, because we'll need that for the asymmetry that's coming in a minute. So let's give this an added state property. We're not added. We'll pass it in. And then we'll set up a stroke around this thing. All right, we'll clip it with a stroke of white with a line width of stroke size. And that also constrains gestures to that circle, right? So we give it a content shape at the same time in there. So that means I can say on tap gesture, and I say added is toggled. I'll do that inside an animation. Just a standard ease in out will do for this one. And let's resume that. There we are. All right, so we're almost there, but there's no asymmetry to it. All right, there's no asymmetry to the way that the horizontal line is moving. And that's why I've included the added property in our shape, because we need to know which direction we're going in order to animate it correctly. For the horizontal line, we actually need to rotate in the other direction. So I'm going to do that like this. I'm going to say if added, as in if we have added it and we are going to the tick, then GH equals GH, and we move this one up. Else, GH equals GH, and we'll duplicate that, bring it down, and instead we actually want to go from 225 degrees because we want it to start in that rotated position but have come from the other direction, so we can rotate back to horizontal, back to the initial position, but going in the other direction. But obviously we've got a problem here because we need to say that the GH is equal to the GH, because order is very important here. We have to maintain the order of these transformations, otherwise it just will not work properly. So here we go. Let's have a look. All right, so let's get rid of the layout guides. And we're almost there. Now we just need a color change. So let's define one. Added color. 0.58 hue, 0.5 saturation, and a brightness of 1. And then we say that the color is dependent on whether or not we're added or white. There we are. And we take the color, we place it there. And I do believe we are done. And look at that, well shy of 9 minutes. I guess that asymmetrical complexity didn't trip us up quite as much as I thought it might. You probably noticed that we used quite a lot of advanced features from layout guides in this episode, so if any of that confused you, do watch my series on that because it should answer any questions that you have, and I will link to that in the description below. Now, one thing to be aware of is that this asymmetry that we've been working on here is not going to work if you have a really slow animation. Watch this. I mean, it will work in the same way, but be obvious. If I set the duration to 4, and then we've got this beautiful animation happening. Wonderful. But what happens if I interrupt it? I click there, and then halfway through, click again. Can you see the jump? If I do it quickly, it might be more obvious. There, click. It jumps into the asymmetrical part of the animation because it's not coming from the same place when it's coming back. What you have to realize in this situation is that it doesn't matter. Because we're doing a default animation with a duration of 0.35 seconds, no one will notice. Even if they do interrupt the animation, they're not going to notice this problem with the animation that we've got. Watch. There we are. So now it's running at 0.35. There's our icon. You just don't notice it. And it's, this is obviously very big as well. So when it's a small icon, and we can just set that now, let's set it down to say 20 or 50. There we go. No one is going to notice. It can just be our little secret. And because we've built this using a geometry reader, and because that's driving the size of the stroke itself and all of the transformations within that shape to get us the result, doesn't matter what size it is. So I could loop through like this. I could do this. If I put this in a V stack, let's say 2 there. Right, and then put this in a for each. If that's the size. Stick that in there. Then we've got our icons. They're all looking perfect and functioning beautifully, regardless of the size of the icon. Okay, so when the stroke and the transformations are all founded on the size of the icon itself, then the size of the icon becomes irrelevant and it all just works like that. So I think that deserves 3 ticks. Lovely. I really do love that icon. I think the designers did a fantastic job with it. And isn't it so nice that we can recreate something like that in SwiftUI with such ease? And I hope it goes to show you that SwiftUI combined with PureSwiftUI and layout guides is a really powerful design tool. I realized that I actually glossed over quite a lot of the details in that because obviously there was a time limit I wanted to hit. But there were lots of things like the ratios that I was using for the sizing of things. And you might wonder, where did I get those? How did I come across those numbers? Well, if you'd like me to go through the details of how I took the original design and determine what those numbers should be, I'm happy to do a video on that if there's a demand for it. Let me know in the comments if that's something you'd like me to take you through. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed that. And if you did, give it a thumbs up because it helps people find the channel, makes me happy. And consider subscribing if you want to see more of this kind of stuff. If you have any other comments or suggestions, please leave them below. But in the meantime, thanks for joining me. See you next time.